Hello and welcome to another, you guessed it, Wheelsboy Quick Review. It's not often that we bring you two cars from the same brand, almost back to back on this channel, but that's exactly what's happening today because we are in another MG. I know what you're thinking though. That steering wheel, that doesn't say MG, neither do the badges on the outside. Well, that's because this car, while it is sold as an MG, specifically the MG Marvel R in the European market, it is sold as the R Marvel R here in China because both brands are owned by SAIC. Either way, what we're interested in finding out is what, if any, differences are there between this version available in China and the one available in Europe. Let's get started. One area where we know this R version of the car will not differ, especially from the European MG, is under the hood, so to speak. That's because both versions will have essentially three trim levels. There will be two dual motor versions, your comfort and luxury, or in Chinese they call it the Pro version. These dual motors have two electric motors mounted on the rear, whereas the top spec three motor version will have a third motor up on the front axle, making it all-wheel drive. The lower spec ones, so to speak, have 137 kilowatts and about 410 newton meters of torque, or around 186 horsepower and 300 pound-feet. The top spec version, the three motor, will have, 300 horsepower, about 222 kilowatts, and 665 newton meters of torque, or 500 pound-feet. That car will go from 0 to 100 kilometers per hour in 4.9 seconds, whereas this dual motor version that we're driving today will do it in 7.8. The dual motor versions, both of them, will have 510 kilometers of NEDC range, or as I recall, about 400 kilometers of WLTP, and then the top spec version, the tri-motor, will have 370 kilometers of WLTP range. All versions of this car, regardless of motor count, will have a 69.9 kilowatt hour ternary lithium battery. Where we start to see some differences between this car and the MG version available in Europe is on the exterior design, but they are subtle. First of all, I'm not entirely sure whether this particular color palette will be made available in Europe, and if that's true, man, they are missing out because it is very, very nice. The color of the paint looks black from most angles, but under direct sunlight, there's a really nice blue metallic flake that you can see. It's actually quite stunning. You also, of course, have these very nice red accents, somewhat similar to the Changan CS55 Plus that we recently saw on the channel. I liked it on that car, and I like it even more on this one. You get more red down here, and you also get a carbon fiber front lip spoiler, similar to the one we saw on the MG5 that we just reviewed. This particular car comes matched with some very nice black wheels, offset by a red R badge, as well as red brake calipers. One thing I'm not a huge fan of usually is this type of kind of heat extractor brake duct thing that you see sometimes. I'm not entirely sure. It looks like it might actually be functional, so credit where credit is due in that respect, but still not a major fan. We have some retractable door handles. A small detail I want to point out, it's one you can't see from there, but we'll give you a close-up. This hidden door handle, when it does pop out, most cars, only the outside part of it is chrome or body color. This particular one, the entire one is chrome, instead of having a ugly black plastic on the inside. A small detail, but one I appreciate. Here on the rear end, we have a nice set of LED lights with a connecting part here in the middle. We also have another big splash of that red material we saw on the front end as well. One thing I do not like, and it relates to those brake duct type things I saw on the side, is these things down here. They look okay, but when you get closer, you realize these ones definitely not functional. Let's open up the electric rear hatch, see what kind of space we're working with. Official number is 357 liters, or 12.6 cubic feet of space back here. Having an eyeball for it looks not particularly deep this way, but reaching back, still a pretty good amount you can use. But wait, there's more. It's not often that I get to say this, but we've got a frunk. I love it. Even more space up here. It's not every electric car that has this, and I think that's a darn shame because it's very useful. There are more pleasant surprises to be found when we get to the interior of the Marvel R. There really aren't many places for me to complain about. I like the look of the dashboard with these nice soft touch materials on either side, bisected by the air vents here in the middle. I also like the look of this center screen here, 19.6 inches, very, very large, complemented by a 12.3-inch infotainment cluster screen here. The space down here is quite copious, but one of my complaints about these floating center stack designs is that it makes accessing the USB ports kind of a pain in the butt. When it comes to space, in addition to the area down here below, we also have our two cup holders as well as the center console area here. Space is somewhat limited, but still a usable amount. Again, overall, I like the styling. I wish there was more color, but what we do see is restrained and very nice. The black leather, the touches of aluminum here on the side, including brushed aluminum, as well as nice red stitching to put it all together. One final note about this front row is that I really love the design of these seats. These are some of the most handsome seats I've seen in quite some time. The black leather is offset, of course, by the red stitching that I mentioned before, as well as this nice strip of Alcantara that runs down the center. They look sporty, but they're also quite comfortable. Rear seat comfort on the Marvel R is, I would say, average, not great. Leg room in this particular car is pretty good. Headspace, acceptable. You do get a nice sunroof up above you. In terms of design, you have a continuation, of course, of the red stitching as well as the aluminum look accents. Bose radio in this particular car. In front of you, you have a Marvel logo in case you forgot which car you were sitting in. Down here between the seats, we have a little pop-out with our two USB charging ports, and then between the passengers is a fold-down center armrest with which I think has one of the best looking designs I've ever seen on a fold down center armrest. I don't say that very often, but it's a handsome fold down center armrest with a pop out cup holder, as well as a small storage area, perhaps for a phone or two. Now that I've given you enough data to fill a book, let's talk about what it's like to actually be behind the wheel of this car. And there is good news to share. As I mentioned, this is a rear-wheel drive vehicle, and it feels that way. It feels quite well sorted, in fact. Much better than the MG5 that we just recently drove on the channel, which took me a little bit by surprise. The steering, while obviously not with particular great feedback, does feel pretty tight. Body control is quite good. The car itself will, of course, roll over a bit in turns. It is a mid-size SUV, but it does feel pretty well controlled in corners. I was quite impressed. There are two buttons to either side of the transmission knob. The transmission knob, there is kind of a almost a mechanical feel to it. It has good click to it that I like, but even better than that are the two buttons on either side. They're kind of toggles like this. One controls the driving mode of the car and one controls the regen. There is sport, eco, and normal driving modes. There is a difference in the weight of the steering, certainly between the eco and the sport, which I think makes the car feel a little bit easier to handle. I like having a physical button for adjusting my regen settings, but I have to say, I don't really like the regen on this car. Even in the highest settings, I find that it is not strong enough. I like a very obvious sense of deceleration when I take my foot off the accelerator in my electric car, and I like it to bring me completely to a stop. This car, again, even in its highest setting, not noticeable enough for me. When you put your foot back onto the accelerator, though, that's where things start to improve. As I mentioned, this dual motor version, 7.8 second 0 to 100 km/h time. This car almost feels like it doesn't even have regen, and I don't really like that very much. Well, there you have it. This car was quite the palate cleanser after the somewhat disappointing MG5 that we recently drove on the channel, and it makes me think that SAIC should really stick to electric cars, whether they're using the MG brand or the R brand, because they seem to make pretty good ones. It also makes me look forward to the MG Cyberster electric sports car that we saw previewed at the 2021 Shanghai Auto Show. Thank you very much for watching today's video. Be sure to check us out on Instagram and Facebook Links in the description below. And as always, like, subscribe, and hit the bell.